Today I'm joined by Frances O'Rafferty, Senior Manager at Baringa, a global consulting firm where she's part of the Data, Analytics and AI leadership team. In this episode, Frances explores the environmental impact of data storage.
You will see quite a lot of stats from kind of the big cloud providers saying how they are net zero and they are creating all these sustainable solutions around the storing of data. But actually that is kind of renewable energy that could be going elsewhere to kind of fight the energy transition.
She also discusses the challenges of managing growing data volumes, including dead data, unused data that still consumes resources.
You've got duplicates of things which, shouldn't really be duplicated. Then you start to end up with all these kind of problems, and then you end up having to go back and sort it all out. So at some point, I think there is going to be a lean into this problem of how are we using data and are we using it in a sustainable way.
Frances emphasises the need for sustainable practices and shares how data products and automated proactive data management can help improve both data governance and energy efficiency.
We have tidied up our structured data more than the unstructured stuff, and I think the unstructured stuff is probably what's causing most of the kind of noise.
I learned a lot in this episode, and I'm sure you will too. Enjoy!
Frances, let's talk data. So we're going to start off with talking about data and the impact on the environment, because lots of people think that data is this intangible thing that floats around that doesn't need to be stored, but that's not the case, is it?
No. There is a lot of investment gone into data centres, and you'll see quite a lot of stats from kind of the big cloud providers saying how they are net zero and they are creating all these sustainable solutions around the storing of data. But actually that is kind of renewable energy that could be going elsewhere to kind of fight the energy transition. There are ethical conflicts around, how your data centre is, there are areas of London now where you can't build more housing because the grid will not support new housing and the data centre.
Right.
So there's all these kind of questions starting to come up around, how much data are we storing? Can that be sustainable in the long term? What is it not letting us do? And I think one of the big problems with it is essentially data storage is free as well. So, you pay for a subscription for so much, and actually most companies use a really small fraction of it. So essentially if they want to store more, it doesn't really cost them anything. Yeah. So you end up with all these kind of, all this data that has been stored and no one's really thinking about it because there's no incentive to think about it.
Yeah, okay, the incentive. No, I like that. Well, yeah, I've got some data around that as well. So these centres consume 1 to 2% of global electricity today, and that could reach 8% by 2040 if no one does anything about it. And dead data is a huge problem. Up to 90% of data stored is unused and considered dead.
Yeah.
So what does dead data mean then? And do we all, as a regular consumer, do I have dead data lying about?
So if you think about wherever you store your photos, whether you've got an iPhone, it's all on iCloud. If you've got Android phone, it might be on Google Photos. If you think about all those pictures, how many copies of the same photo do you have? Yeah. How often do you go back and delete the ones? How often do you delete screenshots of receipts that you take for expenses? Yeah. And then, you always kind of go, oh, should I delete that one? Because what if actually I forgot to do the expense and then I haven't got the receipt, right? So everyone has this bit of nervousness about deleting anything, and it's kind of easier to leave it there. It feels safer to leave it there, but it does cause all of these other issues, right? And if you think about, it's not just necessarily about the environment as well. If you think about the rate of change, the amount of data growing, you're going to need a bigger workforce to manage it all. You're going to need, when you start trying to implement AI over a whole load of data that is actually irrelevant anymore, or you've got duplicates of things which shouldn't really be duplicated, then you start to end up with all these kind of problems, and then you end up having to go back and sort it all out. So at some point, I think there is going to be a lean into this problem of how are we using data and are we using it in a sustainable way.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because storing just 1 terabyte of data generates 7.2 kilograms of C2 annually. Yeah. Oh my God, you just never think about that. It's crazy. And the cloud isn't the cloud, its name is misleading because people think it's generally floating in the air somewhere. It's not physically on a premise. And these data centers are not knocking about towns, they're stored invisibly from the eye. So people, it's kind of like a problem we've pushed aside. And I know they keep getting bigger and bigger, but like you mentioned, that's not the only issue. It's the inefficiency of getting people to manage that data that doesn't even need to be managed.
Yeah.
Are companies talking about this? Like, I know you're interested in it. Where's that interest come from?
So I guess part of it comes from having gone into companies and tried to develop solutions, trying to do things like data products, trying to kind of look at AI use cases, and you have to sieve through stuff, and everyone's like, well, we just filtered this out because we don't use it. It's like, well, why do you keep it? If you're not using it, why are we keeping it? And it actually is making the job harder in some cases, having all this extra data. And I think actually getting the right retention policies in place and then automating them, because really no one's going to, like, the whole going back and finding your data that's more than 7 years old and actually deleting it all. If you have that as a manual task, it's probably not going to get prioritized. So I think the only way that you do get people sort of gaining interest in it is things like when GDPR came in and it then said, we've regulated so that this has to be deleted after 7 years, then people did it. But it's not something that people are keen to do because it's not impacting them. But I think it will. I think the more use case driven we get, the more we start to kind of feed all of our, especially unstructured data. Again, if you think about like how many files you've got on your desktop. So like if you started to create an AI solution that just scanned your computer and said, right, my documents are classified, like I have this many which are talking about this many which are talking about this, and then like half of your ones that are talking about the first thing are like copies of, or copy of, or version 1, final version. It's not giving you a true picture of what's actually there. And I think we have tidied up our structured data more than the unstructured stuff. And I think the unstructured stuff is probably what's causing most of the kind of noise and the dead data there.
And human element and human nature, we do like to hoard.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. We don't like to get rid of things because one day we might need it.
Yeah.
And that's just the same with data then as well. You are right though. I thought there was an AI solution that could go onto your phone and say that's a duplicate photo. Are there those kind of products already in play?
Yeah, they do. But again, like, what's the incentive to use it? It's like, it's what, 99p to buy some extra storage for the year. It's probably easier just to do that. So I think a lot of it does come back to like the incentives around how we approach data and our understanding of it.
Yeah, it is a problem that I don't think it's, I mean, I don't know, from a business perspective, yeah, there's got to be the incentive, but I just don't think there's awareness as well. Like I said, people just think about it as this intangible thing. Like as a consumer, a lot of consumers, we're trying to make difference or changes in how we approach buying fast fashion, for example, how we recycle. I know there's a lot of movement around those areas. So if you said to the same person, you keeping on to that is causing CO2 to go up, they would be bothered. I think the average person.
They would, but they'd want a simple solution to solve it. So what's the easy thing to do? And again, like raising awareness of those kind of apps and more. I think on my Google Photos now, it does quite often come up saying like, these just look like photos of receipts. Can we delete them? But then sometimes I'm like, oh, can I delete that one? Have I done that expense yet? Is that an important thing? And things like, WhatsApp photos syncing to Google Photos and all of that. And I think some of it is, it's challenging that thinking of like, do I need that to sync? Or am I okay for that to just disappear? And do I need to save that for more than 30 days, 6 months, 7 years, whatever it might be? But I think the challenge of fixing it once it's already there is really hard. And I think we have to think about it more during the design phase of capturing what we need and not capturing more than what we need, and automating retention around what we capture. So, when you, especially like when we're developing new solutions or we're kind of pulling data together, there's so much test data that we generate, and it's like, right, have we tested this? Just like purging test environments and like, once we've finished with them, making sure that things are cleaned down. And I think we're getting better at that. But just within the development of a data project, there's so much data which isn't part of the final thing that you deliver, that you create. And just being mindful of like, what are the processes for getting rid of this as we go, and as we don't need it anymore.
So start as you mean to go on,
Yeah.
so it's not a problem down the line. And what do you think good looks like in terms of retention? So you mentioned it's 7 years. Is that GDPR?
That's the personal data, yeah.
Right.
So GDPR has a 7-year retention policy on personal data. So yeah, there are some guidelines out there in regulation, but a lot of it is open to,
Yeah.
you know, if you sit in these meetings and you're trying to get people to say, right, what needs to be in this report, what needs to be here, and people go, oh, but just bring that in just in case. And you're like, okay, but then what you end up is a report that no one understands because you brought so much in for every eventuality that actually you're kind of almost like trying to sieve through it to go, right, well, what do I actually need for this use case, and how do you make that easy to use? So it's more than just the environmental bit. It's how do you actually make data easy to work with when we're creating so much of it.
Yeah, and it's stressful and overwhelming. From a personal perspective, looking at my desktop makes me feel stressed. And I'm not the most organised person, but I know a lot of people feel like that. Similarly, in your house, if you've got a lot of clutter around, you may think, oh, it's fine, I live with it. But once it's gone, you feel like literally a weight lifted.
Yeah.
And I feel like from the data, you'd feel the same way. I mean, 7 years, what do you think about that? Do you think we could be better? Like, do I want people to hold on to my data for 7 years? Probably not.
I think it depends on the use case, right? Like, if you are able to raise a complaint in that amount of time, then you need the data there to go back and deal with it. So it's what is the use case for that data? Like some of the real-time streaming solutions, I'm not really sure how long you need. Like if it's real-time, you probably don't really care about stuff after a week or two. Like, you know, it's kind of moved on. Other things, like I know when we're in insurance, when you're doing kind of when you're doing the pricing and stuff, you want lots of history to be able to kind of go through and look at the kind of average over time to do that pricing. So it's very dependent on the use case, what's needed. And I think it's having appreciation of like what all the use cases are and which data points are relevant to which one, which just comes to a bit of planning and a bit of thinking up front.
Yeah, okay. What do you think good looks look like? Like, would you keep it at 7 years? I appreciate it depends, because that's a good point. Because predictive analytics, that's based on previous habits and the data you've got. But generally at the 7 years, would you bring that down?
So I think from a GDPR point of view, you have to keep it for 7 years. So you couldn't bring that down. I think it depends, like I said, it's what revolves around that. If you can request, if the freedom of information is you can request anything in the last 7 years, then you have to hold on to 7 years. So yeah, I think some of that is driven by legislation. And there are definitely cases where, you know, people are pulling up data from 20 years ago to look at stuff, right? So I'm not saying that you never need to keep it, but it's, do you need every single transaction? Can you keep it at an aggregated level? Those sort of questions, just as part of the design process.
Yeah, be mindful. And are you asking those questions? And have those questions come from your own, I suppose, desire to want to make a change? Or is it more that the company have implemented those questions?
No, it's probably more of a kind of personal battle in terms of, you know, I've always been quite environmentally conscious, and I've always been quite what's the word? I've always been quite structured in my approach to things, and I like to kind of keep things clean as I can. Because I do, like, it's that thing that you just said, like when your house is cluttered, you get that level of stress, and I just kind of like to make sure I can declutter as much as possible. So from a personal point of view, it stresses me out when I can see copies of data everywhere, and I'm like, well, which one do I use? It's not simple, and I just like to simplify the complex. So I think it's come from those two areas of like the environmental consciousness and simplifying complexity, and kind of that kind of has brought me to kind of like, how do we simplify the amount of data that we're capturing, so that we can actually use it well. And we don't have this dark data that's just sat there, which is taking up precious resources, and we don't have data that is, it's not necessarily dark data, but it's like data that's just like noise. It's just getting in the way. So I think it was a great phrase, which is like, data without purpose is just noise.
And
I think that's really kind of that one really resonated with me, and I was like, that's it. That's the bit I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, that is profound. It is. And when you explain this to people, are they on board with it? Like, I think for me, it's just a thing that I just didn't think about. It's almost like an ignorance. But once I hear about it, and, you know, I suppose you've got to make it relatable to why it's going to benefit the individual, the organisation. But I take it most people, when you talk to them about it, they get it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that, it's difficult to get sponsorship because it's one of those things where it's like, well, why do I need to think about that now? And it kind of comes up a bit more when you get to a use case where it's relevant. So when you then start to say, you know, people are like, well, I don't know which copy of my report to look at. And I was like, well, you created 10 of them. Which ones use the most? So then you start to kind of look at that. And that's kind of what I really like about the data product movement as well, is that it's, let's create the data set once, let's create something that's valuable, let's create something that's going to be reused. And then it puts the ownership on that kind of product management team to evolve and stay at the top of their game, right? Don't let someone else come along and create a similar data product that's better. Whereas before it was just like, oh, it's fine to have like 10 reports that are just the same thing in slightly different departments, because it wasn't, the focus wasn't on sharing, it was more about just like getting it self-service, creating what you want, creating something personalized to you without necessarily the training and the guidance around it. Whereas with data products, I feel like it's like, come here, access the data here, don't take copies everywhere else, we'll fix the data in one place, you can consume it from one place, and then you can share it. And it's that kind of way of getting people to share the data more, rather than like that this is my report and your report must be wrong because it doesn't match my report, and that kind of dynamic. So yeah, I'm quite excited about kind of looking at data with that lens on it.
Yeah, has that kind of come from software and the more iterative approach with life cycle? So rather than just, like you said, lots of different products and amending them how you see fit, it's the one that just keeps getting better through those development cycles.
Yeah, and I think it has come from just like the management of the amount of data out there now. You need better management around it, and it's come from the like data having value conversation as well. As by putting that product lens on it, it makes you think about like, what are you creating? Are you creating something that's giving you value, rather than you're creating something that's come from a request? So it changes the kind of aspect of the delivery team, because previously it'd be like, right, here's a data request come in, someone would kind of get the data together and then they'd send it in Excel, or they'd create a report and they'd be like, right, here you go. And then the next day a really similar request would come in and they'd start again and they'd create like a new thing and they'd send it off. And it was that kind of like what you were measured on was like your delivery in a kind of service ticket aspect. Whereas with the product management team, the idea is that you get closer to the business, you understand the business problem, and then you create something that's going to solve, it's going to meet the purpose of it's going to have a specific purpose for the data set, but that data can be used lots of times. So like customer contact details, there's like if you create a single data set, which is your trusted customer contact details, lots of people around the organization are interested in that. There's lots of use cases where people would need to come and get it. You make that really easy to join to other data sets and other data products, and then you just manage and evolve that. So instead of having to like recreate the ticket every time, you just kind of, somebody comes to you and says, I need some information about customer contact details, and you go, right, here's the product, like take it, use it. So you don't end up with all the copies, you actually end up with something that's a bit more kind of, it's online, it's not an offline copy, so it's more accurate, it's more up to date, and you've got a team looking after it and making sure it is good quality.
Yeah, so it's like the push and pull, I suppose, and being, I suppose, at one time quite reactive, and now you can be more proactive, strategic around it, and it's that one single source of truth, which a lot of businesses are striving for, because you ask one team how they do things, and if they pull a report or data or whatever, they're often quite different, aren't they, dependent on who you ask.
Yeah, and it's trying to do it in a modular fashion. So when I started my career, I was very much in the data warehousing space. So it was like, get all the requirements, understand all the business questions. Yes, you got your reusable dimensions, you created the facts which would answer the questions, and then you join them together in the right way to answer whatever the business question was. Whereas I find that this is like even more modular than that, and it's all about how you make it as interoperable as possible, so that you can mix and match depending on what your question is, and then how to make that user friendly as well, and not needing everyone to be super techie to be able to use it, right? How do you kind of create that environment? And there's a lot of work to be done at the base level of just getting those kind of initial core data sets to then be able to build on and create that eventual kind of consumer value. And there's some people doing it really well. And everyone has a different view on what a data product is and how that's going to kind of deliver the value. But, it is definitely being talked about more, which is good.
You could argue it eliminates friction within a business as well, because I feel like there's a misunderstanding, like how much work goes into pulling a report, for example. And a lot of people, they want it now and they don't understand it takes a long time.
Yeah.
But that friction is going to be eliminated if they can get it there in real time and it's up to date. Yeah. And then you're more working on things strategically, project focused, like I said, rather than the ticket system. Kind of like how IT's evolved.
Yes.
Data is doing a similar thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's all becoming much more aligned, and a lot more people are picking up this kind of product mindset of how do we work with the end value in mind, which is great, because it feels like, we always started with business questions when we did data warehouse development, but it felt like we then went to the data lake where it was just like ask the questions and no one knew where to pull it from, and everyone kind of got a bit lost, and now it feels like it's kind of coming back together again.
Yeah. And how do you see it evolving in the next few years then as well?
So I think there's a lot of work being done at the minute around what some people are referring to as like base or foundational products, which is just like, how do you get the core domain data in order? And I think actually building on top of that and building on these kind of really trusted foundations to create specific end user consumer products that will just come out more and more. And there's some companies that are doing it really well already. But I think most people are at that level of, we're trying to get our data in order again. We're on our cloud migration journey, and then kind of starting to get into that. And I think it will become, I think the big thing which will make a difference is the kind of shop front for data. I think a lot of people, when they start at an organization, they don't really think about data. It's not included in the induction. They just kind of come in, and then at some point they might start to interact with data. I think if we can get to a point where, when people join a company, they understand where the data is. There's a shop window, they can go there, marketplace, whatever you want to call it. And that's where you go for everything data. And it might be contacts, like who owns the data, where can you get access to it, what does the data mean, what products do we have that I can just go and take off the shelf and use, which reports might I be interested in looking at. And obviously they all have like different access levels depending on which data you can view. But how do you make it easier for people to just go and find the data and start to make decisions based on the data rather than just a gut feel? And I think it still feels quite like little groups in the business are doing that and looking at data, but a lot of people are just kind of like, I don't really know where to go to find what other people are doing. It's not really got that platform for sharing and saying like, I found out this today, is anyone else interested, or publishing your stuff outward. I think it's still quite, we pull our data from our own places and we're not sharing it as much as we could.
Yeah, it's kind of got your own agenda with it rather than thinking about the bigger picture. And of course, you work at a consultancy, so you partner with companies that are going on a data journey.
Yeah.
But you're working with them at different phases.
Yeah.
And maybe different commitment levels. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what are the big differences then than those who are going through the motions because that's what everyone else is doing, and those who are generally on board with it?
Yeah, so I guess you get everyone's at such different points on the journey, but you get somewhere they've done a lot of foundational work and they understand their data and they're ready to kind of move into that. Right, I want to create like my performance dashboard that's going to go in front of the board, and this is going to be like our trusted numbers that we'll do everything off. And then there's some that are, we're still looking at, everyone's looking at technology all the time and going, have we got the right technology? Do we need to change things there? There's some really cool AI use cases that people are starting to work on, and AI solutions that we're working with people on. But then there's other teams where it's just like, we just need to get your data right. And there's still a lot of migrations. There's a lot of people migrating off legacy systems onto new systems. So everyone's kind of got a different level of ambition. Some people want to, like, data's at the kind of real forefront of their business strategy. And I think that's the thing, if it's not at the business strategy level, it's not going to kind of come through. And then other companies are just kind of like, well, we use it when we need to, and we have we've got some investment in it, but then, how does it take off? And I think I work mostly in FS, which is highly regulated. So there's a lot of focus on like the data we need for regulation and the data we need to kind of keep the operations going, which sometimes makes it harder for the innovation use cases to come through, but there are some really good ones coming through as well.
So, I bet. And does it come from, obviously you're giving guidance and recommendations, but also I suppose as people start to understand what's possible, do they start putting requests in like, can you do this for us? Or I saw this elsewhere.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of it just comes from, we talk a lot about what we've done at other places, and then they go, oh, that's a good idea, or I've heard this person's. So I think with Baringa, we're very much, we like to kind of get that kind of trusted partnership. So we tend to go in and we work with companies for quite a long time on different challenges. So I guess that's the big thing, is we tend to go in and we tackle something big and something hard, and then we kind of make sure that the team work with us so that they can take on that, and then we move on to the next big challenge. So you're kind of always working on the next hard thing and trying to solve the big problem, which is really great. But it does mean that, you know, there's an onus on us as we're there to make sure we've taught the in-house team to manage it and continue to manage it as we go through. And I think that's the big thing, is data management has always been quite reactive, and I think it's turning that needle to get it more proactive. And how do you kind of automate all these processes? How do you introduce notifications and alerts so that you don't end up with this kind of yo-yo of like, we've done a big data management project to fix a load of things, and then the data steward team disappears and no one does anything for a couple of months, and then actually the data quality level declines, and then you need to do a big cleanup again. So how do you avoid that, and how do you kind of make sure that you've got a team that is getting alerts, that is working through the issues as they appear, and you're just a bit more on top of it?
Yeah, and this is where sustainability comes in again, because you don't want your partners to be reliant on you forever.
Yeah.
That's not the point. I mean, generally, an average size company, how long would the data transformation be partnering with the likes of yourself?
It varies a lot, because it depends where they start and what their ambitions are as well. So there might just be, you know, there are transformations where it takes, you know, a year or two to kind of get through that transformation. There's others where it takes much longer. There's others where they just want a POC, so it's much shorter. So it depends very much on the ambition and what they're moving to.
Yeah, it's a big journey, and I think, you know, we've spoke about this a bit more broadly. Within the industry, it seems like some leaders are definitely set up to fail. You know, they're brought on, whether it's CDO level or a data leadership level, and the company thinks they want to embark on a data journey, but they haven't got the money, the resource, the time, the belief, I suppose.
Yeah.
And why do you think that is?
I think it's because people think it's going to be easier than it is. I think people aren't always... I think once you kind of get that, you need to quite quickly get that understanding of what your data landscape currently looks like. I quite often say, like, if I turned up on a project and I had a data model and I had the diagram of the data flows, I'd be off to a cracking start. Never had that.
Right.
It always takes quite a long time to get hold of a data model and how the data flows, and quite often it's kind of, we build it up as we turn over new rocks.
Right.
But yeah, it's one of those things that just, you know, it wasn't always captured in a holistic way. So you might get lots of different solutions that have been implemented that have a data model or have some information about how the data flows, but then trying to capture that as a holistic view from all of those different ones, that it hasn't always been brought together. There's a lot more enterprise architecture teams now than there used to be that are trying to bring that single source together, and what does the view of everything look like. But yeah, I've yet to land somewhere where they've just said, oh, here's my data model and here's a diagram of all my data flows that will tell you how everything works. So I think there's a bit of that's the high level, and then from there kind of getting observability over it all and just being able to say, right, this job didn't run today, who's looking at it, and having that ownership assigned to it. So you need to be able to spot the issues when they happen. You need to have a team in place to deal with the issues when they happen, and then from that you'll get that trust of your users, because they'll be able to see, oh, okay, that's ran today, I know it's up to date as of today, and I can see the quality is good.
Yeah.
Based on business rules as well. It's not just monitoring the columns. Sometimes you need to do that, but you also need to kind of say, right, well, there are other business rules. So if I go back to kind of contact details, for example, you might have multiple phone numbers captured for a customer. They might not be mandatory, because you might be able to have a phone, sort of home number or a mobile number. You don't have to have one or the other. But for a business rule, you need to be able to contact them. If your business rule is I need to be able to contact them by phone, then one of those numbers needs to be populated, and one of those numbers needs to actually be valid. So it's that kind of just scanning and profiling an individual column. So if you're just looking at mobile number and just looking at home landline, it might not be answering the business question that you're actually trying to answer. So it's understanding what data quality rules need to be there from a business point of view, and then pulling that together in a visible way.
I'm thinking I need to make some changes. How we store data, for sure. That's also a stressful thing to look at my CRM. And do you work with financial institutes? Some of them are super innovative and agile and really on board with this. But I do believe, and not just for financial services, but there can be change adversity in certain companies. And how do you tackle that?
Yeah, and I think some of it's change fatigue.
Yes.
Because there is so much change going on right now. And I think it's kind of like, we just changed that last year. Like, why are we changing it again? And there is a bit of like trying to sort of peel back what you're trying to do and actually talk about the business reason why you're doing it. So it's kind of like, what is the business driver for what you're doing? Do you want to market in a different way? Do you want to expand your product range? And then kind of honing in on, right, okay, this is the business strategy, and this is why we're changing what we're doing with data to match the business strategy, and then everyone just feels a bit more bought in. So I think it's trying to kind of tell that story as you go. And I do see it sometimes, like you'll be working with especially like you'll be working with an engineering team, and you can tell they're just like, we've just been running this code, it's not working, we don't know why we're doing this anymore. And you're like, and it's that kind of like, right, reframe, right, think about what we're doing in this sprint, what's the aim of the sprint, and kind of breaking that down into like smaller chunks as well. So this is the big picture, this is the big aim, but in the next 2 weeks or in the next month, this is what we're trying to achieve, so that you're kind of putting some kind of achievable milestones in place. And just being able to monitor like gradual improvement as well. I think that, how often do we stop and look back and go like, actually, given like the last 6 months or the last year, like how far have we come? We don't often take time just to stop and think about that.
No, we don't. That's really key, especially if it's a large transformation program and the end seems so far away. And it can be if it's a journey, because things are ever evolving. So you are right, like whatever you do, whether it's a personal goal you're trying to work towards or a work one, rather than just go forward all the time, take a step back, reflect, and maybe just tap yourself on the shoulder a bit as well. Change fatigue, and
I think sometimes it's like establishing habits as well, rather than necessarily always having a goal to go for. It's like, right, just check this report every day. And if you check the report every day, you know where you are.
Yes.
Ideally, it gets pushed to you and it's a notification when it goes wrong. But, just little things like, do you know today how good your data is? Are your users going to come knocking on the door at 10 o'clock going, my report doesn't look right today? Like, just getting used to that kind of, right, in the morning, I'll get my coffee, I'll look at this, right, I know that's fine. And building those kind of like small habits, and things like, I think we talked about this before, like just understanding who's using the data and then having a chat with them and just be like, what are you using it for? And then you find out and you go, oh, I didn't know you did that. Or they'll, quite often somebody's put it into Excel and joined it to something else, and you're like, oh, did you know we could just add that to this data set? Or did you know you can just join these two data sets that already exist together? So there's a bit of, as a team, we need to be kind of aware of where the data is going as well, more than we ever used to need to. Yeah,
the connection and the reason and purpose behind it. I just want to talk to you as well about, obviously, your career journey coming from the Northeast, then being in London, probably quite a male-dominated environment, I imagine, and having children alongside of that. So how was that for you? How was that experience?
Yeah, so I guess like my parents both came to uni in London and they went back to the Northeast, and I remember their experience being like, London's really expensive, like it was really difficult to do anything. And I actually graduated from uni in Sheffield in 2008, which was like 2009. 2009, which was like the height of the financial crisis. So all the
yeah.
jobs were like, because no one wanted to hire grads. So I ended up, like all the jobs were in London. So I ended up coming to London, and I was like, it was a little bit nerve wracking, but I'd done quite a lot of summer work in London previously I was like, I couldn't afford to live in London and do internships. So what I did was I did a summer school with international students. So I got to know London. I got to work with some really cool people.
Wow.
And they paid for my accommodation while I was down here as part of the kind of salary. So I'd had a bit of a chance to get to know London through that, which was nice. And actually the company that I worked for at the beginning of my career was quite small. It was probably 100 people, including like the HR functions and finance team and everything. So that was actually a really nice company to start with. And there was kind of six of us on a grad scheme, and we learned everything about business intelligence in the first year, and then we learned everything about ETL in the second year. So it was a really supportive team, really lovely kind of group of people. And then they just got bought out, things started to change, and I kind of thought, right, let's go and learn how to do this at scale. And I went to Accenture, and Accenture was big.
Wow.
And it got bigger and bigger while I was there. And I learned a lot there. It was really about kind of scaling up, and yeah, I went there to learn how to do things big and get the support while I had my family as well, because the support that Accenture had for kind of parents was really good. So yeah, I had my daughter in my late 20s, which was quite young at Accenture, I think. I got my manager promotion when I came back, and realised that most of my peer group didn't have kids and were still socialising a lot in the evenings, and I was just finding that really stressful. And when I came back after having her, everyone was kind of like, don't come back 4 days a week because you end up working 5 and you just don't get paid for it. So just do the 5 days, put them in childcare. And my husband actually decided to go back 4 days after. So he had kind of Fridays with her, and that was really lovely. And then I had my second about 18 months later. So when I came back after having him, it was like, oh, everyone works 4 days a week. Like boundaries, like, you know, don't work on your day off. So it was amazing how in 18 months it had already started like to move the needle there. And then COVID happened. So yeah, 2 young kids at home. We basically pre-lockdown went up to Newcastle and lived with my parents for the 12 weeks, and
wow.
My husband got put on furlough as well after a week, so I was basically the only one in the house working. So they all had a blast.
You're like, don't worry about me, guys.
But I was still working 4 days at that point, so that was quite nice. It was a balance, and me and my husband both worked 4 days for a while. We then had my third, and that was after COVID, and that was interesting because it was like companies were struggling to get women back in the office after they'd had kids. They were like, well, I've worked from home the whole of COVID, why do I need to come back in? So again, totally different dynamic going back, where it was like, you know, people were nervous about putting their kids back into nursery. My daughter was starting school, so that was quite a challenging time trying to balance everything, but I was really keen to get kind of back on with my career at that point. So I'd had kind of 4 years where I just about kept on top of everything. I quite often joke with people that I just missed the Hadoop era. Like as I was going off with my first, it was just starting to come, and by the time I came back, everyone was migrating off that onto cloud. So I was like, okay, don't need to learn that. But yeah, so then I was back 5 days a week, and I think we've both been back 5 days a week now for 18 months.
Right.
And my little one's about to start school next September. So then they're all at school. And that's kind of like our milestone.
Do you know what? That's really interesting in data, actually. If you're off for long enough, you just miss
the
next
hype.
tech. Yeah, the hype, exactly. I don't think AI is going anywhere, but,
No.
you know, in terms of like data mesh, that's not, you know, I suppose that's quite a good point. You're like, yeah, I don't need to bother with that one.
Yeah, I remember being on my third mat leave, and my client had messaged me and was like, what do you know about data mesh? We want to do that when you come back. Have a read up. So I was like listening to podcasts as I was pushing the buggy around, like trying to work out what this data mesh thing was. And then obviously, like when I realised, I was like, this feels like such a good idea. And there are a lot of parts of data mesh that are really good. And I think if we were mature enough at a baseline, that it would answer a lot of questions. But especially the governance bit, I don't think that there's enough base governance in a lot of organisations yet to be able to scale it.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think that, those principles give a good foundation for what getting better might look like.
Yeah, okay. And then in terms of balance then, do you believe in balance? Because I remember I was listening to someone the other day and she was like, it's just sacrifice. You're just sacrificing one thing for the other. It's not balance. You can't achieve balance. You're just putting more attention into one thing than the other. That's not balance.
No. It's, and I guess growing up in the 90s, right, everything was like, women can do everything. Women will work, women will have kids, you can have it all. What a lie. We just get more and more stressed. Is it a balance? Good question. I think you always end up feeling guilty for something. And I don't know, because like I said, I tried to do 4 days for a while and I got FOMO and was like, I don't know what's going on at work. I want to know what's good. And I think, and then I think, maybe flexibility is the answer. And if you can flex things, and I guess that's the other thing. When I came back from having my third, I went to client site and clients would have open diaries. This is women and men with school pickups in and swimming lessons in. That again would not have been there when I went back after my first. The culture has moved massively in 3 or 4 5 years. So I think, people have more flexibility in a lot of, and especially in data, they seem to have a lot of flexibility in how they kind of manage their time. But what that does feel like is it's well, you're just on 24/7 and sleeping is difficult because you're your brain's always going because you don't necessarily have the wind down time. So I think it does come back to boundaries. I think it's knowing where your personal boundaries are. And I think I always say it all comes down to me if it's my step count. If my step count is less than 10,000, I've had a bad day. And that probably means it probably means I didn't take the kids to school because I didn't get my steps there. And it probably means I didn't go for a walk at lunch because I just went downstairs and got whatever was in the fridge. And it probably means that I didn't listen to a podcast because I tend to listen to podcasts when I go out walking. So it's kind of and then it probably means I didn't do any exercise because I didn't get the steps in. So I'm always right, it's quite a good metric to track.
Yeah.
Whether I've had a productive day or not.
Yeah.
And it's not always about sitting at your desk all day. That is not necessarily the measure of my productiveness. So I've kind of gone to trying to measure more of it's a good day if I've hit my 10,000 steps. And maybe I need to up it because I need to get back to getting, I was doing really well at the beginning of the year and I've definitely declined as the year's gone on.
Habit building.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to rebuild that habit in the new year.
Yeah.
But
like you said though, it's interesting because it was very black and white before, wasn't it? School, work, school again, but maybe the core 9 to 5 hours. And now that's great that kids pick up swimming lessons, maybe go to the gym on your lunch, but then in the evenings you're not switching off. Evenings have then disappeared and then you're going to bed and then you've only just stopped working or eating or whatever. So it's it does just feel like you're on all the time. I know I do, because the 4-day week I think is interesting. If everyone did 4 days, that would be great. But I'm in professional services as well, so I've got clients. So I can't go, I'm not going to work Friday. They're but we want to have a meeting with you on Friday. I'm going to have that meeting, because we are reliant on our clients. So that's why I like Christmas, because most of my clients don't work. So I can finally, I still look at my emails as if something's going to come in. I'm no one's working. And that is when I can truly switch off. So I think that is the problem. If you make the decision, you need to commit to it, but it's easier said than done.
Yeah, and I think my boundaries have been very much I take 2 weeks off in the summer and 2 weeks off at Christmas, and I'm looking at potentially what it might look like when Reese goes to school if I just said I'm going to take every half term off. And just said, right, every 7 weeks I have a break, because I know that when I'm at work I'm on 100%, but I'm quite good at blocking it out for a week if I'm off. And I think if you're only off for a day or two, 1 day a week, you don't block it out. But if you're off for a full week, it makes a big difference.
True. That is true. So. And then what advice would you give as opposed to parents, new parents, men or women, that want to maintain their career but are scared of that because they also want to have a family? Because I do think it's a worry, and it's becoming more of a worry for a lot of people. So what advice would you give?
I think communication. When you had one parent that was at home and did all the housework and all of the childcare and you had one parent that was at work, like the responsibilities were really clear and defined. When you're both working, it's like everything becomes a grey area, and it's like we literally have like calendar invites for everything. We have alarms for everything. Like it's like I think we had that day where you forget to pick the kids up and you get the call from school and it's like, are they at after school club today? And you're like, oh. Luckily the school is just around the corner, but like we've had that before where we've just missed it because an alarm hasn't gone off. So we now just have so many notifications and alarms that just make sure we're in the right place at the right time. So communication is a big one.
It is, because you end up arguing just because you're both tired and stressed and you're like, you should have done it. No, you should have done it. But if it's in the calendar,
exactly,
with someone's name by it,
and then outsource everything that you can. So it's like we've got to a point now where we just get like HelloFresh or Gusto or something, or Mindful Chef, or whichever one it is, we cycle around them. But it's like, right, that's there, you don't have to make a decision. The food, you just follow the instructions, because we both like cooking, but just the planning, getting the right stuff in is really hard. So that's our kind of like, right, we just make the meal that's there, and that's fine. And then, like, you know, getting a cleaner or something to come in and just take a bit of that off. So it's like we've just kind of gone, right, where can we take the pressure off, and just take the pressure off in those spaces. And it's really hard, because it's like, do I really want to spend money on somebody coming to clean my house when I could do it myself? But then you're like, I don't actually do it, right? And then it's like, okay, the house is a state again. There's, you know, the kids come in from school and within 10 minutes the whole place is like carnage. And it's like, okay. So learning to live with the mess a little bit, and then outsourcing as much as we can.
Yeah, I think like you said about change fatigue, I think people have decision fatigue. Like the example of, I'll go to a supermarket after a day at work, I'm like, I don't know. I just don't know. Like, I'm not even interested, but I'm starved at the same time.
I mean, I just go, like, I go down to like Toast to my lunch, and I'm just like, right, what's the daily specials? Because it just narrows the choice down.
I just have the same every day. I'm known in Philpotts near me, and honestly, the staff even said that, do you not want to try anything else? I'm like, no. But then Steve Jobs, he used to wear the same t-shirt every day, the same outfit, you know.
Stops you everything.
Exactly. I'm focused on the important things, not my lunch. But no, I think that's really good advice. And yeah, learning you don't need to be perfect as well. Like, if you're trying to get that balance, we said it doesn't really exist.
Yeah, and you'll always feel guilty about something. And I think if you can accept that, and you just have to, like, don't let that guilt eat away at you. You just go, right, this week this is getting sacrificed a bit. This week this is getting sacrificed. And actually, like, I've been working away more. My daughter was like, oh, I'm not sure how I'll feel, because she gets to do a residential next year. She's like, I'm not sure how I'll feel being away from my family for a night. And I was like, well, sometimes I go away for a night and it's okay. And she went, oh yeah, I guess so. So it's kind of like, I try and like see the positives in it, of like, I can kind of say, you know, I do it, so you can be brave and do it too.
Yeah, I like that. And what about your culture then as well? Like, is there a vulnerability, not just around parents, because a lot of people have things outside of work, whether that's children or other responsibilities. Is there that openness? Because we all know that is probably a better culture where people feel they can just be like, I can't do it today. I've got so much going on. Is that an environment that you work in and you try and adopt with your team?
Yeah, well, I mean, Baringa themselves are a very people first company. So that's they are people first and impact that last. That's the kind of high level motto. So they are really, really good. And there's a lot of kind of areas to talk, and our advisors are really supportive. Yeah, we have some really great teams there. I'm really, really lucky to work with a client at the minute that has a very similar culture. So they are always like, oh, you know, if your kid's got a play, not a problem, don't worry about it. But yeah, they know that we've built a relationship where they know that the work will be delivered, and, you know, we trust each other. And I think that's like the nice thing when, like, I don't think I've ever had a client that hasn't been accommodating, because I've gone in there, I've proved that the work's going to get done. So they're like, well, as long as it's done, it doesn't matter, like, if you do it this time or this time, right? As long as it's done. So yeah, I think I feel very lucky that I've worked in cultures like that, and it's made it much easier to kind of be flexible. And yeah, I think, you know, there was a whole conversation we had recently about like leaving loudly. So don't just kind of sneak out because you've got to go and do a school pickup at 6. Like, it's like you just kind of go, right, I'm off, I've got to pick the kids up at 6. Like, I'll see you tomorrow. And they were encouraging actually people that didn't have kids to do a similar thing. Like, if they wanted to go to the gym, or they were off to the cinema, or they're going to the theatre, they're like, you know, just let people know why you're leaving early. You don't have to sneak out. And I was like, that's actually a really nice kind of way of doing it, because it doesn't then make the parents feel guilty, because it's not just them saying it, and it actually gives the people that don't have kids that kind of flexibility to say, actually, I do want to leave early today for something, and they can, because it's then an accepted thing to do.
Yeah, I like that. Leave loudly, because in our culture it's like, sorry, I'm gonna go. Because we're made to feel guilty, and it's probably past the work hours anyway, and that can be very toxic. That's brilliant. So who came up with that initiative then?
I can't remember who came up with it.
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, it's been around. I feel like it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah.
These things, because we should be able to talk like honestly about, like, that vulnerability piece is key. And I don't know, it's difficult because people say don't bring your problems to work as well, and it's trying to find that boundary, because that's quite toxic, like that toxic messaging. But in a way, you can feel better going to work and forgetting about those problems. So what do you think about that?
I think you can't bring your whole self to work and not bring your problems to work.
You can only have part of me today.
It's like, which one are you going for? Is it don't bring your problems, or is it like bring your whole self? So I think it's very culture dependent, and I feel really lucky that I've worked with companies that have generally been like, we see you as a person, which is interesting, because obviously working in professional services, like, you are technically a resource, right? They are paying for you to be there and to give you advice, but yeah, I think, you know, everything works better when you have trust with each other, and you just know that, you know, somebody's going to have a bad day every once in a while, but they will deliver on what they've promised. And I think, you know, that's just the human side of it.
Yeah, sounds like a great culture. I'm definitely going to bring in Leave Loudly. Bye! Like on a megaphone. Yeah. It's quite interesting to find out what everyone's doing with the night as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, you know, there's other nights where you'll be there till like 11 o'clock, like
not leaving
doing
loudly.
stuff, not leaving loudly, because there isn't anything that you need to get away for, and there's just work that needs doing. And we all have that, right? Where you've just taken on too much, which I'm very, very, I do way too much. But yeah, it's like quite often it is just like, sometimes you just have to get things done.
Yeah, stay quietly.
Stay quietly. Yeah, stay quietly, get it done. But yeah, it's a balance.
It is. Right, so we're going to move on to the quickfire data lightning round.
Okay.
What is one myth in data that you'd like to debunk?
Data is hard to understand. So I don't think data is hard to understand if you display it properly. So I think people can kind of get lost in the world of data, thinking it's really complex. And it is, to a certain extent, but I think if you present it right, it can be really easily understood and really impactful.
Yeah, definitely. What is a book, podcast, or event that you'd recommend?
Sol Rashidi's book, The AI Survival Guide. Really good book. I think it applies to a lot of data solutions, not just AI. And it's actually a really good practitioner's view of the world. So it's not very theoretical. It's much more like, this is a story about what I did, and this is what worked well, and this is what didn't work well. So I've read quite a lot of theoretical books recently, and that one's quite nice, that it's like a real on the ground.
These are the use cases.
Yeah. And this is the problems that we had. Yeah.
Keeps it real.
Yeah.
Finish the sentence. Data is the key to
confident decision making. So I think as a maths person, I really liked being able to know that I got something right. And quite often when people ask me something, I will doubt myself to whether it's the right thing. And if I have some data to back it up, or data to challenge it, then I feel a lot more confident with the message that I am portraying.
100%. What is a piece of advice you'd give to someone just starting their career in data?
Be curious. Go and find the things that you like. Explore. Data is a big space. Like, try and move around. Find the area that you like best, and then learn to say no to the stuff you don't want to do.
Yeah, I like that. It's ever evolving as well, isn't it? So career choices are changing all the time to a degree.
Yeah.
Because as technology evolves. And what is a data buzzword that you love to hate?
Oh, I don't know. Data buzzword that I love to hate. don't know, I avoid using buzzwords.
That's fine, then you can say all of them.
All of them.
I know, everyone I talk to hates buzzwords, but why do we all have them in data then? You guys have come up with these things.
It's more consulting buzzwords that that I think I get fed up with more often. But yeah, I tend to avoid stuff as much as possible.
Yeah, and you could argue, and that's the thing, I've been talking about storytelling with Scott Taylor recently, and he was like, these buzzwords cause such a barrier because if you're a non-data person, they're disengaged and you want to buy them into the strategy. They're not going to if you kill them with buzzwords.
Yeah.
So just all of them.
Yeah. I mean, especially like, I guess because I've done a lot of data quality work recently, and it's kind of like when people talk about like duplicates and integrity, and you're like, yeah, okay, means a lot in our space, but like to the business, they're just like, it's just the data's not right. That's all you need to say.
The data's wrong. Yeah, don't try and make it sound better than it is. It's wrong, fundamentally. Yeah. We'll eradicate them all.
Yeah, they just want to fix it. And it's quite an interesting one because you quite often have like, you know, IT want to keep things operational, they want to keep things running, and the business, they're going, I'd be happy with data that's a couple of days old if it's right. In certain use cases, and some you do need it more accurate. But yeah, it's an interesting balance, that one.
No, it is. Well, thank you very much.
Awesome.